Picture a place where rain has not fallen in living memory. Not a storm, not a shower, not even a passing drizzle. In some corners of this desert, no rainfall has ever been recorded since measurements began. The ground is cracked and bone pale. The sky stays a hard cloudless blue almost every single day of the year, and the quiet is so complete it feels like a held breath. You are looking at the driest place on Earth outside the frozen poles, a desert so starved of water that space agencies come here to rehearse the search for life on Mars. This is the Atacama, a long ribbon of desert pinned between the Andes and the Pacific in northern Chile. And the strange, almost unreasonable truth is this: even here, in a landscape that nature seems to have engineered to hold nothing alive at all, life refuses to let go. If you've ever wondered what lives in the Atacama Desert, the answer is far stranger than the emptiness suggests. It is hiding inside rocks, inside salt, and inside a wall of fog that rolls in silently from the sea. First, understand just how dry this really is. Across much of the Atacama, the average rainfall is measured not in centimeters but in a millimeter or two a year, and in its hyper-arid core, it effectively rounds down to nothing. Certain weather stations have sat for their entire recorded history without logging a single proper rain. You will often hear the dramatic claim that some spots have been dry for 400 years, and that exact figure is hard to prove, so scientists argue about it honestly. But the deeper fact is not really in dispute. This is one of the most rain-starved landscapes on the planet. Only the frozen valleys of Antarctica seriously compete for the title of driest of all, which is why careful researchers describe the Atacama as the driest hot desert, or the driest non-polar desert on Earth. Why is it so brutally dry? The Atacama is caught in a near-perfect moisture trap. To the east, the towering wall of the Andes wrings the rain out of the humid air drifting in from the Amazon long before it can ever reach the desert. To the west, a cold ocean current chills the Pacific air and locks its moisture into a low blanket of coastal cloud that almost never breaks into rain. Squeezed between a mountain barrier and a cold sea, the desert gets the worst of both worlds. It gets fierce sunlight without the water, year after year after year. That exact combination is why this place has become the closest thing we have to another planet. Dig into the Atacama's soil and you find it laced with the same kinds of chemicals we have detected on Mars. There are nitrate salts and reactive compounds called perchlorates that are poisonous to most living things. In its driest zones, the ground is so sterile that when scientists ran the classic life detection experiments here, the very tests designed to reveal microbes came back almost empty, as if the soil was simply dead. Researchers began to call it the dry limit of microbial life, the edge beyond which biology seems to run out of room to exist. So space agencies bring their Mars rovers and their life-hunting instruments to this desert to practice. The logic is simple. If a machine can pick out the faint signature of life in soil this dead, it might just be able to find it on Mars. The Atacama has quietly become our Mars analog here on Earth. There is even a strange kind of proof written across the desert floor. Because rain almost never comes to wash them away, the Atacama holds vast natural deposits of nitrate and mineral salt, hard crusts that would have dissolved and vanished long ago in any wetter place. For more than a century, those deposits were mined and shipped around the world as fertilizer and explosives, whole towns rising and then dying on the back of salt that exists only because the sky stays shut. The very emptiness of this desert is what let those minerals survive. Here, dryness itself became the thing worth harvesting. And yet, against all of that, life is here. It is simply never where you would first think to look. The secret begins with the one gift the sky does offer. It almost never rains, but along the coast, most mornings, the ocean breathes in a thick grey fog the locals call the camanchaca. It pours over the low coastal hills like a slow, silent tide, soaking everything it touches in a fine, damp veil. And for the living things of this desert, that fog is the difference between existence and nothing. This is life without rain. moisture stolen straight out of the air itself. The story of Atacama Desert life is not written in forests or in great herds. It is written in fog, in salt, and in stone. On certain slopes you can find whole colonies of a plant that has given up on the ground entirely. It is a kind of Tillandsia, a distant relative of the pineapple, and it grows with no working roots in the soil at all. Instead, it lies in loose grey ribbons draped across the sand, drinking the fog directly through tiny scales on its leaves, its rows angled and spaced to comb the maximum moisture out of the passing mist. Where that fog reaches, lichens crust the rocks and hardy plants gather in green pockets the locals call lomas, fog oases that appear like islands of life in the emptiness. Everything alive here has learnt the same single lesson: forget the rain and harvest the fog. But the most extreme survivors of the Atacama do not just live in the fog, they live inside the rocks. Turn over a translucent quartz stone lying in the desert pavement and you may find a thin green smear on its underside, colonies of microbes and algae sheltering beneath the crystal, using it like a dirty window that lets in a little light while shielding them from the killing sun above. Others burrow right inside porous rock, living in the microscopic pores between the grains, hidden away from the heat and the ultraviolet glare. And out on the great salt flats, life gets stranger still. Blocks of raw rock salt act like sponges for the atmosphere. When the humidity climbs even slightly, the salt pulls water vapor straight out of the air and condenses it into a microscopic film of brine deep inside the block. And there, sealed within the salt, colonies of tiny microbes drink that briny moisture and quietly stay alive. These are the Atacama microbes that turn fog and salt and thin air into a living, the most stubborn tenants in one of the harshest addresses on Earth. Move up in scale, and the desert offers a few larger wonders. Clinging to high rocky slopes grows the Llareta, a bright green cushion plant so dense and so painfully slow-growing that a mound the size of a couch can be thousands of years old. An ancient living thing that gains only a sliver of a millimeter in a year of thin, cold, sunlit air. Cacti stand in silent ranks on fog-fed hillsides, their spines quietly combing droplets from the drifting mist, and in the high salt lakes of the region, water finally gathers, salty and mineral-choked and ringed with blinding white crust, and it draws in flamingos. They wade through the brine on impossibly thin legs, sweeping their strange bent bills upside down through the water to filter out the microscopic life that blooms even in these poisonous-looking pools. Along the desert margins, guanacos and their wild cousins the vicuñas pick their way across the stony ground, and small foxes and rodents survive at the edges, where a little fog and a little altitude leave just enough to cling to. And the desert does not stay flat. In the east it climbs, mile after mile, into the high Andes, where the thin air turns bitterly cold at night, even as the midday sun blazes down with some of the most intense ultraviolet light ever measured on the surface of the planet. Up on those frozen volcanic slopes, thousands of meters above the sea, life clings on in even smaller and tougher forms. Scientists combing the high peaks have found a little rodent, a leaf-eared mouse, surviving at altitudes once thought far too high and too airless for any mammal to endure, scraping out an existence from lichen and scattered plants in a place that is part desert, part mountain, and part open sky. It is a reminder that the Atacama is not one flat wasteland, but a whole ladder of extremes. And on every rung of that ladder, from the fog-soaked coast to the frozen volcanic summits, something has quietly worked out how to stay alive. Then, once in a great while, the Atacama does something that stops scientists in their tracks. In rare years, usually when a warm ocean pattern shifts the weather far offshore, real rain finally reaches the desert. And within a few weeks, ground that looked utterly and permanently dead erupts into a carpet of flowers stretching all the way to the horizon, pinks and purples and yellows blazing across the pale sand. It is called the flowering desert. Those blooms come from seeds that have been lying buried in the soil for years, sometimes for many years, waiting in suspended patience for one single soaking that might never come at all. The instant the water arrives, they race through their whole lives, sprouting, flowering, and setting new seed before the dryness clamps back down. Then the color drains away, the fresh seeds settle into the dust, and the desert returns to its long, patient waiting. All of this happens right at the outer edge of what life can tolerate, and that edge teaches us something profound and a little unsettling. Because the Atacama also proves that too much water can be just as deadly as too little. When freak rains struck the hyper-arid core a few years ago, scientists expected the sudden moisture to make the desert bloom with microscopic life. Instead, many of the native microorganisms were killed outright. Cells that had spent untold generations perfecting the art of staying dry, flooded, and burst under the shock of the very water they had learned to live without. Stop and think about that. Here are living things so exquisitely tuned to dryness that rain itself became a poison to them. That single result quietly reshaped how researchers think about the search for life beyond our planet. On a world like Mars, life, if it is there at all, may not be sitting and waiting for water so much as clinging to the barest trace of it, tucked into salt and shadow, exactly the way it does in the Atacama. That is what makes this desert so much more than an empty smudge on a map. The Atacama is a natural laboratory sitting right on the boundary between life and lifelessness. Every lichen on a stone, every microbe sealed in a grain of salt, every rootless plant sipping the sea fog is a small live experiment in how far biology can be pushed before it finally completely stops. And by studying precisely where and how life hangs on in the driest place on Earth, we sharpen the only real map we have for recognizing life somewhere else, on a colder, drier world with no fog, no flowers, and no second chances. So the next time you picture a desert, remember this one. A land where it may not rain for a human lifetime, where the sky offers nothing but a wall of grey morning fog, and where life still finds a door through salt and stone and mist. The Atacama looks like the very end of the living world. It is really a lesson in how stubbornly, how creatively, life refuses to end. Now we would love to hear from you. Of all these survivors, which one amazed you the most? The plant that lives on fog with no roots at all, the microbes sealed alive inside blocks of salt, or the buried seeds that wait patient years for a single rain? Tell us in the comments. And if this changed the way you see the driest place on Earth, stay with us, because the natural world is full of impossible things that turn out to be true.